Be a servant leader, be a sacrificial leader, care about those you're leading.
Those most senior leaders are served after all the troops are fed. So it's this visible daily reminder of where the leader's priorities are.
If people noticed, God, there's all these empty spots, but the CEO always parks in the back. Every time, always parks back there. It's akin to what you were saying in the military. The officers are waiting. They're in the back.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore what it takes to become the kind of leader others want to follow, not because they have to, but because they want to. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my co host, Justin Hamrick. Each week, we bring you insights drawn from science, from the stories of exceptional leaders, and from practical experience to help you lead with greater character, competence, caring, and communication. Justin, you had mentioned to me a topic you thought would be great to discuss for this episode of the podcast. Can you share that topic and what led you to be thinking about it?
Yeah, I was listening to different talks on leadership, and a theme kept arising between a couple of the speakers. And it was this idea of servant leadership or sacrificial leadership. So I know we hadn't talked about that yet. And I thought it'd be great just to really get into what that is, how it looks, especially how it looks in different organizations.
Yeah, servant leadership's a huge domain in leadership and leadership literature. You and I haven't talked about it. You're right. General Vince Brooks was on one of our early episodes, and that episode was really focused on this idea of servant leadership. But I think it'd be a great area to talk about today. Is there any particular thing that you wanted to kind of roll around, or?
Well, the main thing I was thinking of is while it's probably very difficult to do, I think in the military, it's probably easy to identify, like sacrificing your life for someone else, sacrificing your safety for somewhere else. So I thought about that while probably very difficult to do, especially in the heat of battle. It was easy to identify. Where I thought it may be more difficult to identify, and I'd really like to get in, is what does it look like in medicine? What does it look like in the business world where it's not you're not putting your life in front of a bullet for somebody else, but what does that sort of sacrificial servant type leadership, what does it look like? And why is it beneficial? Because in a lot of circumstances, to climb the ladder, people will say you need to step on other people to get up the ladder. So, how does that look in business or in medicine outside of the military? What does servant leadership really look like?
Yeah, I think that there are differences in what it can look like. You're right, depending on the context. The first thing that I would say is that great leaders don't lead for their own glory.
Mm,
And I think when that's the context that we come at it with, then it helps us to have the mindset of the servant leader better than if we're just after it for our own glory and our own goodies, if you will. The great leaders really lead to bring out the best in those that they're leading or really they're serving, I think. And so sometimes that means sacrificing personal comfort or ambition, which is a huge thing in various areas, or safety for the good of the team and the people that you're leading. So certainly in the military context, it's often described, as this simple idea that actually hit on in the book. Officers eat last, right? So that's a good example. You mentioned like sacrificing your life, and that's the extreme end of it. But day in and day out, officers eat last is really a good example of being willing to be a servant leader or sacrificing something, risking not having chow, if they run out of food, right? So those most senior leaders are served after all the troops are fed. So it's this visible daily reminder of where the leader's priorities are. You mentioned in healthcare. I think in healthcare, it could look like a lot of different things. One thing that comes to mind is, let's say a department chair who takes the call, a weekend call for somebody who's a junior colleague, because maybe that junior colleague has a child's recital that they want to attend or something of that nature. So the department chair, who oftentimes isn't involved in the call pool, may take the call for that person. And in the business landscape, it could be a CEO who forgoes some kind of bonus or stock option or a higher salary to ensure that the frontline employees are able to keep their jobs during economic downturn or challenge or something of that nature. So I think at its core, putting followers first is about this idea that it's actually one of the Air Force values, but service over self. It's the mindset that shifts from leadership being a position of privilege or authority to being a position of responsibility, and that responsibility being taking care of the people that you're leading. You're responsible for leading. So those are some thoughts immediately.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like the best part of a parent relationship. Not the patriarchal, I know better than you, you're going to do the way I say, but you really care about your child more than you care about yourself. Every parent will know that and say that. But you want them to succeed more than you care about your own success. Like you will give up and sacrifice your time, your energy so that they can succeed. Everybody sacrifices their own financial gain for their children as they enroll them in things and buy them things and, do various things. And I think it really puts the question of one of your C's, the caring,
Mhm.
like this really comes out in the sacrificial leader. And I think about someone in a company, someone higher up than the leader. I'd say a leader over multiple groups, and then you have a leader of one group. And something goes really successful. And they come to the leader of that group and they're like, we're really impressed. Wow, this is amazing. And start to give accolades to the leader. It's very difficult, I think, sometimes for a leader to go, well, actually, this isn't my brainchild. This is insert someone you're leading. Like to give them the credit, to give them the accolades, to give them the glory, if you will. That type of sacrifice, I think, is underrated sometimes, but really demonstrates a sacrificial leader and the caring of that leader for the people that they're leading, really first and foremost.
You mentioned, it's a sacrifice to, I would say actually in that scenario, what people don't understand, we see it usually as a zero-sum game, right? If somebody wants to give me the accolade, but I then deflect it and point it toward the people that I'm leading, a lot of people in society would say, well, then I've lost out.
Yeah.
But it's not true. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a win-win because when you give that credit where it's actually due
Mhm.
to the people that you're leading, that reflects on you. They see that they can trust you, that you're gonna give them the credit that's due them, and they're gonna do so much better job in whatever the mission is that you're trying to accomplish, so that then you are a more effective and better leader, and that just returns to you to that end, right? That you by giving it away, you actually get more. That's not what you're trying to do, that's just the nature of it. Like, when you actually study this sort of thing is that it actually returns to you more than you give away. You actually end up getting more credit if you point it to where it's due.
Mhm.
So it's a fascinating phenomenon, but so many times we get caught up in this zero sum thinking that we miss that.
So I think we've defined what it is. A leader, the actions that come out of leadership when you really care and at times care more about the people you're leading and their success than you do your own. Everything that sort of comes out of that. And like you said, I think it's interesting. I think it is viewed a lot of times, and even sometimes by myself, that it's a zero sum game, to not take all the credit, take all the accolades, that to give them away, it's got to be that. So I guess where we always talk about it. What is the science? What do the studies say about the servant, the sacrificial leader? What do they say about the benefits of that? I mean, because morally and ethically, I think we would always say, yes, that's how leaders should be, but we don't always expect that. But what does the science say about the benefits of that type of leadership?
Before we jump into the science, there are a few more things rattling around that I feel like it'd be good to kind of just level set some more definitions, not necessarily
Hmm.
of servant and sacrificial leadership per se, but just to help inform the conversation a little bit further. Is that I think it's imperative that people remember that being a leader, it's not about your position, your title, your authority. People who are in leadership roles, again, differentiating leadership and leadership roles, but people who are in leadership roles because of what it can do for them and their egos are rarely, if ever, good leaders. I think we probably could agree on that, if we thought about it. And in fact, I think most of the time, those people aren't really leading at all. Leaders who people want to follow are different, right? They put others first, even when it costs them. And so I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about the kind of leader that we want to be, the kind of leaders that we're talking about in this podcast, that we're talking about, that I'm talking about in my book, is the kind of leader that people really want to follow, not somebody who's being coerced to follow, forced to follow, threatened, all these sorts of things. And this idea of serving others and sacrificing for them increases people's likelihood of following, right? Now, I think it's vitally important because I can just hear people out there thinking, well, you're sacrificing yourself and so on, that you have to, in our current environment, there's so much talk about self-care and, and these sorts of things. And
Mhm.
those are valuable conversations and important. So I think it's important to clarify that the idea that we're talking about here doesn't mean that you're ignoring yourself. You're not ignoring your needs. That's not what we're saying. It's really reprioritizing or subordinating some of those needs or wants for the sake of those that you lead. So you're putting them first. Again, you're not ignoring it for your own self, but you're prioritizing the people that you lead over your own wants and needs. So I think that's a really important note to put in there.
And ultimately, the success of the organization, because as the people succeed that you're caring for, then the organization will succeed. They will do better. They will feel, we've talked about before, feel a sense of safety at work because they feel like they can trust their leadership and they are going to be more likely to follow those trying to lead them. I agree. We're differentiating leadership from maybe people who are managing other people, but not really leading them.
Yeah, or in these administrative or leadership roles, right? They're different. So let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The Four Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you will order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation.
Now, Tom, I feel like now we've really gotten to the definition of what we're talking about, the sacrificial leader, the caring leader, the servant leader. But really, let's go back to the heart of what we're saying, which is okay, well, that's good. I think it's ethical, it's moral, it's something that some people would say that is essential to leadership. But what does the science say? What does the science say about the the data? What do the results say?
Yeah, I mean, so far we've been kind of talking aspirationally, but there are a lot of strong data, a, a growing body of research that supports this idea that servant leadership, which is a leadership style, if you will, characterized by prioritizing follower growth, well-being, and empowerment, leads to better organizational outcomes. So there was a meta-analysis, and I know you know what that is, but for our listeners, basically where scientists explore the literature, they find all the studies related to a given topic, they analyze those particular studies, how they were done, and then they collate all of the information from the best studies and then analyze, sort of reanalyze those data so that they have a much more robust data set that they can draw conclusions from. And so there was this meta-analysis in 2019 by Nathan Eva and colleagues that was published in the Leadership Quarterly, which is a leading leadership journal. And they found that servant leadership is strongly associated with increased trust, organizational commitment, job performance, and follower well-being. Additionally, Robert Lydon and his team showed that when leaders consistently demonstrate self-sacrifice and prioritize their teams, followers reciprocate with higher loyalty, discretionary effort, and it creates psychological safety. And additionally, in work by Dr. Richard Boyatzis, who incidentally was a guest on episode 16 of the podcast, demonstrates that neuroscientific evidence suggests that acts of leadership selflessness activate mirror neurons in followers. So in our brain, activate these things called mirror neurons, and that creates emotional resonance and fostering a sense of shared purpose. So it really does increase so many important things when it comes to efficacy from a leadership standpoint, organizational success, and then leaders being able to influence those that we're leading. So, in short, really putting others first isn't just a nice idea, it isn't just kindness, it's actually effective leadership grounded in solid evidence.
I mean, a lot of the things you were talking about seem to be like people are going to be less likely to quit and they seem to work harder. Like a lot of those things seem to be
Right.
like,
Yeah.
hey, if you care about the people you're leading, if you these acts of service, sacrificial leadership, it's associated with people who work harder, work well together, and are less likely to leave, which
Yeah.
is huge.
I appreciate that
Something
synthesis. I feel as the person talking about all the research and all that, I feel compelled to use these certain words and phrases and things, organizational performance and et cetera, et cetera. And I really like the fact that you're like, okay, so if I just boil that down, it's
they're not
these.
going to quit. Okay, good.
Right. Yeah, right.
What about what about you have someone in your organization that you're leading that you don't really connect with as a person? Maybe you just don't like their personality and it's really, really tough for you to care for them. And this is where I see it really becoming difficult to sacrifice yourself for them. Like, what do you do in those circumstances? What advice do you have in those instances to really, 'cause I could see, like, if you're sacrificing for one person but not another one, it may actually become a negative feedback where they see this unequal treatment where it then your acts can actually create a wedge in the group. How do you balance that?
There's so much there. We could honestly do a podcast just on this concept, but so we had a guest on the podcast a few episodes ago, Doug Crandall, and he was talking about when he was an instructor at West Point and he first got there, he met someone who told him, "I've never met a bad cadet." What the person was saying was that it was a mindset. The reality is, as much as we try not to be biased against different people, we often are for whatever reason. Maybe we had an interaction with them. It's like, what a jerk. And that clouds how we interact with them
Mhm.
moving forward. And then as a result of what's called the Pygmalion effect, how we see people is how they will respond. It's a fascinating phenomenon. If I expect good things from you, you will produce good things. If I expect bad things from you, you will produce bad things. It's amazing this interaction that happens as a result of the Pygmalion effect. And so I think that perhaps in those scenarios, the first thing we should do is look in the mirror and say,
Mm.
what is our contribution to this? What part are we playing in this negative relationship and interaction? We often create this narrative that it's the other person solely, right? I mean, you and I have had friends who've gotten divorces. We know our friend's side of the story. We don't know the other side. We don't know the ex-wife or whatever's side of the story, right? But there are two sides of that story. And so the same is true in these negative relationships we might have in the workplace when we're leading people, is that we see only our side of the story. And what's called the fundamental attribution error results in us not understanding the other person's side of the story. So we attribute to them negative things. So now we've got this bias that we've created as a result of some probably minor interaction at some point early on.
Mhm.
And then they become problematic because we expect them to be problematic as a result of the Pygmalion effect that transpires. And it creates this cycle, right? And the way to break that cycle, you're probably not going to break the cycle by intervening on that person, but you can intervene on yourself. And then you've got a chance to actually disrupt it. Because when you start treating that person in a different way, they'll start responding in a different way, in a better way. Now, I can imagine there are people out there who's like, well, you haven't met this person that works with me or that person, the other person. You're correct. I haven't. But I think as leaders, it's our job to do our very best to bring out the best in the people that we're leading. And this is the first step in trying to do that. And you go down that pathway and you try your best. And if they are just recalcitrant, then it's a different thing. But I would say absolutely the first step is, what am I contributing to this relationship that's causing it not to work?
As you're saying all this, I realize that the acts of service, we'll call it, the sacrificial leadership, probably has the ability to affect those individuals the most. Much like shining a light into darkness, if you've had a way that you interact with them, which may not even be bad, but maybe it's neutral. It's more neutral than another person you're leading that you find easy. They do everything you ask them to do. They're always but then this other person that maybe is a little more difficult to lead, if you sort of show them more of those sacrificial acts when maybe even your view, they don't deserve it or whatever you're saying, it has the ability to impact them probably more than anyone, because they'll see it as a change or something different, or something that they weren't expecting.
I agree. I think that it is somewhat shocking, perhaps. Hey, we've had this tense relationship and suddenly something's changing for the good, right? So I think that absolutely would cause anybody to pause and say, hey, this is moving in a better direction. I need to reassess this and be a part of that, I think. I don't think that most people without psychopathology, I feel like I've got to put a qualifier in there, but I don't think most people without psychopathology are just looking for tense negative relationships, right? We've only got a certain amount of emotional and cognitive energy. And there are so many tense negative relationships that are out there. We're not looking for one more. If we can have a relationship that is easy, doesn't take so much energy, those are the places that we want to be, right? I mean, that's where I want to be. I'm not, at least I guess I could just speak for me. Old Tom here, I'm not just looking for one more tense relationship that I've got to navigate. It's much better when it's easy, when it just flows, right? And and the reality is I contribute to those tense negative relationships, even though I may be completely unaware of it.
Do you have a real world example of a story that sort of really puts this quality of leadership under the magnifying glass and sort of shows the benefits or even the downsides of it and sort of how you approached it?
That's challenging. I'll have to take a minute to think about that.
I have one that's it's it's a little superficial, but it sort of touches on something that we had before. I was in a department once where the chair had access to funds, discretionary funds, and they could have used that for their own projects, their own salary, and they routinely chose to reward the actions of the people that they were leading, like to sort of sacrifice their own monetary reward to really highlight, to give a monetary value to what they considered actions that were really benefiting the group. And what it did was it really put a spotlight on that person's actions and that person's own sacrifice. And so that's a very simple idea that I had, and I remember seeing of a person that was leading me in the past.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a negative example
Mm,
from an institution where you and I both worked once upon a time, and it has to do with it's just it's the silliest sort of example, but it's an example of leadership position versus leadership. So where we used to park, a nice parking garage, some people might refer to it as parking structure or whatever you call it, but a parking garage. And when I first got there, we had assigned spots, like I was number whatever, 76 or something, and that was where I was supposed to park. But then they got rid of those numbers and it was free for all, right? And we got a new CEO of the hospital. And the CEO had never been there before, but as soon as the CEO got there, there was suddenly a placard at the closest parking spot to the hospital, reserved for the CEO. And so many people in the organization got a terrible outlook about the CEO just because of that. Here's this person coming in, gonna jump right up front and take the best parking spot and put a metal sign up that says, "Hey, this is mine." So that's an example of a negative, how somebody made that about themselves, and it had repercussions that honestly, I think you could go to that place today, and a lot of people would still have a bitter taste in their mouth, if you will, because of that. So that's a negative example I can think of that similar to yours isn't. I mean, mine's even less grandiose, right? Like it's a parking spot, but it demonstrates very clearly what not to do when it comes to this concept.
yeah, it's one of these things I think it's probably very easy to get wrong a lot of times in 1,000 different ways, but it's also very easy to get right in very small ways that will have huge effects. I mean, to use your example, think of what would happen if people noticed, God, there's all these empty spots, but the CEO always parks in the back. Always, every time, always parks back there. It's akin to what you were saying in the military. The officers are waiting. They're in the back. Nope,
Yeah,
nope. You guys, leaders park last, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah. I mean, I was in a meeting just lately, and there's a table and 6 chairs, and so and everybody in this meeting we're equals, okay? And 2 of us are on one side of the table, and one guy's on the other, and there was an empty seat beside him on the side of the table, and then there were the 2 on the ends, so the head of the table, so to speak, right? And this one person comes in and sat at the head of the table, and to me, it was like, you should have sat on the side like the rest of us because we're all equal. And so I think that diminishes your influence when you do that. Because people automatically look at those sorts of things and say, "This person thinks that they're better than we are, or more valuable, or whatever it may be." And as a result, people are less likely to appreciate what you have to say, to listen to it, to offer their opinions, to do a number of things that
Mhm.
are really valuable for your leadership, right? So that's another example just of you were saying very simple things. That's another example of a really simple way that you can mess this up royally.
So it's always nice when we give our listeners take home points. Like, and especially when we're talking about something like this that many times can be discussions about things that are very abstract. Be a servant leader, be a sacrificial leader, care about those you're leading. Okay. It's like telling me to care about my children. Okay. But yeah, but how do I do that? What are some ways that you find in leadership and in talking to all of these generals and admirals of the ways that really can concretely like give people take home points of this is how to do it right, or to how to avoid doing it incorrectly.
Sure, I can provide a few. First, I would say adopt the mindset of leader as servant. Whatever mindset we go into something with, that's going to be our operating system, if you will. And so if we go into it with, I'm here to help, to enable, to empower, to serve the people that I'm trying to lead, that's going to go so far, like really take you a long way in being able to do this. As a practical component of that, you might like if let's say you're having a meeting or something like that, you might try going into the meeting, asking yourself some question that helps you activate on the leader as servant mental model. And that is something like, what does my team need from me to thrive? When you ask yourself a question like that, it changes your mindset, reframes your role from that of the leader or director or manager or whatever to enabler. You're enabling the people to do their job. So you're there to support and help. And so I think that's the first thing I would say is adopt a leader as servant mental model or mindset. The second thing is, and this is so important, make sacrifice visible but not performative. Okay. In the sense that, like you were saying, parking at the back, standing at the back of the line when everybody else is eating, and then you go last. That's visibility, not performance. So these little gestures, you know, giving up the best parking spot, taking the tough call schedule, publicly crediting the team, all the stuff that we've talked about, right? I think that speaks volumes. The key is authenticity, though, because the moment that you make it about optics, that's a word, buzzword a lot of people are using these days, but you make it about optics, you destroy trust. So it's got to be authentic. Another one would be shield in public, coach in private. That
Mhm.
is, don't make people look bad in public and things of that nature. If something goes wrong, the buck stops with you. If you're the leader, do not blame other people. Take responsibility when things go wrong, even if the mistake isn't yours. Then address the issues constructively behind closed doors. That does so much. That lets people know that they can trust you. It creates psychological safety. It fosters commitment to you as a leader. There's so much that comes from that. And we all easily mess that up. You know, again, you want to build up in public, reconstruct, if you will, in private, um, because it's so easy to destroy people in front of a group, and that is often irrecoverable.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I wanna sorta highlight one thing you said because I think it is
yeah,
so important, and I was sort of thinking, "Well, how would I answer that question?" And it's look for opportunities to highlight the works and achievements of your team in public.
yeah,
The credit thing I see, like, maybe the person isn't even there, you're at a leadership meeting of other leaders, and they say, "Hey, great job with your team. That's really great on X, Y, and Z. Your production went over, blah, blah, blah." Like, and a key, it's gotta be authentic. Like, they have to have actually earned that credit, but if they've earned that credit and it's really their responsibility to highlight that, "Well, actually, this person helped us do that by X, Y, and Z, and it's really their accomplishment, but thank you."
yeah. When you give credit, praise in public, I mean, that shows so much support. It empowers people, encourages people. It is so valuable, and it doesn't cost you anything. Again, we were talking early on about this idea that we often see it as a zero-sum game, I lose, you win sort of mentality, and it's not that at all. It returns to you multiple folds, but it goes so far in helping you with regards to building relationship, encouraging your people, fostering great leadership. It's really important, and it doesn't cost you a cent. I mean, it's incredible. A fourth thing that I would say is share the load strategically. As leaders, when we model self-sacrifice wisely, it empowers others to be able to step up, right? To be able to begin to develop those capabilities of leadership that we are responsible to grow in the people that we lead. And so I think it fosters this kind of culture of development. And also, when you empower people to step up, it creates this sense that we're all working on this together. And so I think that that's a fourth thing that I could add.
The thing I sort of that jumped out to me the most as something I probably didn't realize, but if you asked me, I could probably get the multiple choice, is that praise, achievements, credit, whatever you want to call it, is not a zero sum game. To give it or to reward it is not to like it's not like food. Like if I give somebody half of my sandwich, if credit were a sandwich, I still only got half a sandwich, you know. So I think that's a really, really important concept for people to understand and to really believe, because I think that belief and understanding will drive change.
I agree. I think we're nearing the end of a good conversation here. I think that, ultimately, again, getting back to these ideas, when we are servant leaders and we're really sacrificing for those that we lead, it turns out that a lot of times we end up not sacrificing because it returns to us so much. It improves so much of what we're trying to do with regard to leadership, and I think that we all would be better for it. And this is an area with so much scientific support that servant leadership and sacrificing for those that we lead is a great way to go. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.